We're in downtown Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. This was once, about 100 years ago, one of the richest cities in the world, and you could tell as you walk around the faded grandeur of a once great city, but this is now a desperate country. Its economy is in shambles, has been for a long time. Argentina famously defaulted on its debt more than 20 years ago. But now hyperinflation has made this country genuinely desperate. You see, when you have dinner here in restaurants and people pull out bricks of local currency, the peso, to pay, it feels like Weimar or Zimbabwe, but it's not. This is a developed country that's moving backwards at high speed. And because of the frustration that has built up among the population, particularly among poor people, a man called Javier Milei is poised to become its next president. He's a former soccer star, a goalie, a performer in a Rolling Stones cover band, and a libertarian economist. He's not a libertarian in the traditional American sense. He wouldn't fit into the Cato Institute, which has attacked him for liking Donald Trump too much. He's a libertarian in the traditional sense. He believes people should have the maximum amount of freedom they can be given, which is a lot, much more than they now get in Argentina. He has moved from basically nowhere in the last several years to become maybe the most famous person in this country. The election is next month in October, and once again, it seems like he's likely to win. The reception he's gotten from the press in the West, particularly in the United States, the New York Times, the Washington Post, also the Financial Times, has been hostile, to put it mildly. They describe him as a far-right figure, like he's a Nazi. Is he? We sat down with him at great length just a moment ago, here right across from the president's mansion, the pink house that he hopes to soon occupy, to find out what he's like. He didn't seem very radical. Continuing what they're now doing in Argentina seems radical, in fact, insane. But judge for yourself. Here he is.
The Javier Milei and Tucker Carlson interview has finally dropped, and what we see is it was genuinely incredible. If you want to go watch the whole thing, the link will be in the description down below, as will everything that I use to make these videos, much like how it is in every single video that I make. If you want any of the sources that I use, you can just go to the description, go click it, it will be there. Okay, let's get into this. And I wasn't going to have Bitcoin news up here originally, but they said something that I was basically going to say verbatim, exactly how I was going to say it. So we're going to give them some credit because they deserve it. And if you're not following Bitcoin news, go give them a follow. The views on Tucker's interview with Javier Milei don't lie. It's clear people around the world are craving for the ideas of freedom, liberty, and Austrian economics. Man, and I am so happy to see that that's the case. With 323.1 million views at the time of this screenshot alone, we see that this is even apexing the viewership of Donald Trump's interview that he had with Tucker Carlson on the night of the Republican presidential debate. So what it says is episode 24. Argentina's next president could be Javier Milei. Who is he? We traveled to Buenos Aires to speak to him and find out. This interview is amazing. Please go watch it if you have not. Go watch it right after you finish this video. I will not be covering all of the context of it. I will be covering the reaction to it and how people seem to be talking about it. I will also have the Zero Hedge article at the end of the day that covers more of the depth that actually goes with Javier Milei's policies and how he wants to cover fixing Argentina and making it a world power within 35 years. Let's go ahead and jump in, and what we see is 265.5 million views with the Donald Trump interview. And with that, I thought this was going to be the most famous tweet that ever came up in Twitter history for the next minimum 5 to 10 years. Turns out I was wrong. Donald Trump, the most famous and infamous man on the planet, isn't even enough to go ahead and pull more viewership than the beauty of the fundamental ideals of liberty and libertarianism. And I can't get over this, because what we see is, at the time of this recording, we are at 335.2 million views. It has not been 24 hours since the release of this interview. It has not been 20 hours, and we have absolutely apexed the viewership of the interview with Donald Trump. That is unbelievable, genuinely remarkable, and I never thought I would see it. We're going to scroll down and go ahead and look at this meme, and this is from, I believe it's libertarianeurope.com. I used this meme for a thumbnail that I made for my last Javier Milei interview. Please go ahead and watch both of my Milei videos. They are quite good, I would argue. I'd argue me arguing for the fundamentals of libertarianism is me at my best. Let's move on, though. It says, if printing money would end poverty, printing diplomas would end stupidity. And here's the deal. Diplomas are just degrees, and thermometers have degrees, and we all know where people stick those. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into the people who have journalism degrees, and that's people who write for The Guardian. From prime time to lurid tales in a shed, the rapid descent of Tucker Carlson. Carlson, once seen as a Republican power broker and even a presidential candidate, has grown more extreme and less relevant. Could you think of anyone more fundamentally less serious than people who work in the government and journalist class? Genuinely, on an honest note, I would like to know in the comments below, do you think there's anyone less serious than the journalist? Which is nothing more than a tobacco executive trying to peddle you poison. They are seeing Tucker Carlson as less relevant than ever. He is absolutely demolishing his old viewership when he was on Fox. A good night on Fox News, and I mean an incredible one, Tucker Carlson was getting roughly 4 million views a night. With that, we see after his switch to Twitter, this most recent interview with Javier Milei got 335 million views. I don't know if they know how to count and do simple math, but that's quite a staggering difference. And here's the deal. I expect this interview at minimum to get 400 million views. That's the population of the United States. But what's so great about this is, this isn't just about the United States. This is about the world turning their heads to see the beauty and the ideals that are represented when you truly push for freedom at the utmost. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in. We have a tweet from Jeremy Kauffman. Jeremy Kauffman being someone who runs part of the Free State Project in New Hampshire. If you're not familiar with the Free State Project in New Hampshire, go ahead and look it up. If there was anywhere else that I would move outside of Texas, it would definitely be New Hampshire. Okay, so he's bringing up points that were brought up during the interview and certain things that were said. And these are things that if you're someone who's deeper into the fundamentals of libertarianism as well as the philosophy, you hear this and your ears perk up. You sit up and you can almost feel your hand shaking to salute. He says, the principle of non-aggression, Hayek called it the fatal conceit, the invisible hand of the market, the left are true criminals, the state can give nothing because it produces nothing, Milton Friedman, equality is a false premise. He's real. And that's absolutely how I felt. The more I listened to this interview and the more I've watched clips of Javier Milei and I've gone and I've checked more things out about him and checked out his policy, he's real. He's absolutely real, and I genuinely wish that Donald Trump was half as good on half of the issues as Javier Milei, because that would mean we had a true orator who spoke for liberty rather than someone who spoke for their own ego. And I say this as someone who moderately likes Donald Trump. I'm not the biggest fan because he operated as far too much of an authoritarian for my liking. What he did with his blunderous handling of the COVID epidemic in his last year of presidency in 2020 alone should mar him as one of the worst presidents of my lifetime, because he completely destroyed the fundamental economic structure that we orient ourselves under. And I know it wasn't just Donald Trump. This was pushed top down from so many different metrics, but you have to be able to lay the blame on him. He kept Fauci on the job. He gave Fauci a presidential commendation for how he handled the COVID epidemic. Donald Trump dropped the ball, and he needs to be held to the standard that we are going to hold everyone to. If we're going to hold the left to it, we must hold the right to it. It's simply how we must operate if we're going to be objective. Okay, so Javier Milei referenced something from Hayek in this, and what he did was he referenced this, and it's the use of knowledge in society. I will leave this linked in the description below. Please go give this a read. I will be reading it once more right after I record this video. I haven't read it in quite some time, so I'm not going to go ahead and make any commentary on it because I don't want to get anything wrong. You don't want to actually disrupt the beauty of what I would say is Hayek at his best, which is explaining the fundamentals of how we apply ourselves in society through the ethos of libertarianism. So it says practically every individual has some advantage over all others because he possesses unique information of which beneficial use might be made. And this brings me to the Thomas Sowell quote that I always think of when it comes to stuff like this, is that even if we achieved true equality today, by the time that we woke up tomorrow, the world would be unequal again, because that's simply the way the world works, and we are all not balanced in any standard. Everyone is going to be better than someone at something, and that's okay. That's the beauty of us being such a diverse set of people that have a capacity to do so many different beautiful things across so many disparate perspectives and across so many, I would argue, lanes of expertise. And with this capacity of having so many different fields and lanes of expertise, you have people that can diversify their understanding of what they need to do, which will then bring in more information, which will then grow these certain systems, because with the process of relying on other people and the substructures they've created, you can then bolster a stronger foundation for anything that you need to orient yourself under. And with that comes the process of how you would create a strong economic system. Anyways, moving on, let's go ahead and get into this tweet from Peter St. Onge. The state does not create wealth, the state destroys it. The state can give you nothing because it produces nothing. Javier Milei. That's a 10 out of 10 quote. That needs to be in every history book from every kid that's reading anything about the understanding of liberty and how that would apply to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the revolutionary times in the United States, which many people, even someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, are now saying what he believes is we live in a modern 1776 moment. And he's absolutely right about that. Vivek's wrong about some of his tendencies when he talks about China and how we need to handle the war hawkish tendencies of what we need to do with Taiwan, but nonetheless, he's absolutely right about that. Let's go ahead and get into this article from Zero Hedge. Never embrace socialism or the siren song of social justice. Argentine presidential candidate Javier Milei warns Tucker of the dangers of statism. And yeah, I'd argue there's no greater danger to the liberty of all free people on earth than statism. There's no greater threat to free people than government. Argentina's leading presidential candidate, Javier Milei, a self-described anarcho-capitalist who won the primaries with 30% of the vote, sat down with Tucker Carlson this week in Buenos Aires for a wide-ranging discussion. That in itself is an unbelievable statement. Self-described anarcho-capitalist won primary with 30% of vote. Man, that's just incredible. Prior to the interview, Carlson documented firsthand the hyper-inflammatory status and perils of the statism run wild in Argentina. Here we see episode 23, hyperinflation and reckless monetary policy could soon devastate the global economy. We traveled to Argentina where it's already happened. I did a video on this. I will leave it linked above right here. You can go ahead and put it in another tab if you're willing and listen to what I have to say. I'm breaking this video down in real time and pausing it so I can explain the historical context of how this has happened both in the United States as well as in places like Weimar Germany after the fall of what we saw in World War I, where they had to pay off all the debts from all the destruction that they had caused. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Carlson and Milei talked about why the citizens of Argentina are fed up with the relentless lack of change and the relentless economic decline, echoing many similar patterns taking place in the United States, with one-time congressman explaining his platform of radical change, which would include the dissolution of numerous socialist institutions and the very central bank which has led Argentina into multiple fiscal crisis events. If you want to understand the history of something that will lead you into fiscal crisis events, go look into centralized banking systems. Milei's advice to Americans is simple. Never embrace the ideas of socialism. Never allow yourself to be seduced by the siren song of social justice. Don't get caught up in that terrible concept where there is a need, there is a right, but that can happen on its own. And where there is a need, there is a right is a reference to a Karl Marx quote. So we see that we have to be prepared for this. To wage a cultural war every single day, we have to be careful because they have no problem with getting inside the state and employing Gramsci's techniques, seducing the artists, seducing the culture, seducing the media, and the meddling of educational content. And if you're not aware of what he means when he says Gramsci, he's talking about Antonio Gramsci. Go ahead and pull that up in a tab and go ahead and read that. One big thing I like to do with these certain pieces of news, that when they bring up historical context of people, I like to bring it up so people can go ahead and put it in another tab, read it on their own, because you're going to have a far better way of inculcating this information into your own mind and retaining it if you just read something for a minute and 30 seconds on something that was brought up randomly in a YouTube video than some dude just making some off-color quote that you will absolutely forget. Reflecting the slippery slope of American leftist politics, Carlson noted that the Argentinians have adopted many left-wing social issues. He says, I didn't fully appreciate the degree to which the Argentinian government had embraced fringe American academic social style justice. What we see is a businessman told me today at lunch that people who identify as transgender pay lower taxes, and that in 2019 you had a Ministry of Women and Diversity created in this country for the first time. What does the ministry do? And first, we're going to get to the fact that transgender people are paying lower taxes. That's absolutely insane. No one should be paying lower taxes than anyone. I don't believe anyone should be getting taxed in the first place because I think you're being robbed by the threat of violence at the barrel of a gun from the state. But what you see is if there was going to be a tax rate, I would say it should be a flat tax rate. That way everyone's treated equally because that's what we're all supposed to be under liberalism. It's equal, right? So it says, in theory, the ministry is supposed to deal with women's issues. But when you look at the results, you find there aren't any, just writing songs. Carlson asks, are women happier here? Milei responds, no, because there are no results. And added, why isn't there a ministry of men? Then Milei really touched on the third rail by supporting President Trump and offering some advice. And when he talks about what happened with the Ministry of Women in Argentina, he talks about the fact that they were approaching things like the gender pay gap, and how when you approach the gender pay gap from anything more than a singular varied analysis, when you look at it from a multivariate form analysis and you take in all different kinds of information and approaches as to well as like how long people work, the jobs that they work, the hours that they take, how agreeable and how disagreeable men and women are, all of these different things, you'll see that what happens is the distance between the pay gap dwindles and dwindles and dwindles till it's effectively nothing. So, as we go on, President Trump was being supported by Milei when he was going off on his third rail, saying Trump should continue his fight against socialism because he is one of the few who truly understands that we are fighting socialism, that we are fighting the status. He understood perfectly that the generation of wealth comes from the private sector. The state does not create wealth, the state destroys it. The state can give you nothing because it produces nothing, and when it attempts it, it does so poorly. So I'd say, if I could humbly offer advice, all I could say would be to double down on his efforts in the same direction, defending the ideals of freedom and refusing to give an inch to the socialists. And Donald Trump has had an issue with, let's say, defending all the ideals of freedom with his unconstitutional bump stock ban, as well as how he handled the blunder of the COVID epidemic. Moving on, I already had my little micro tirade about that. The discussion included Milei's controversial denouncement of the Pope, his views on abortion, and his belief that climate change is a socialist lie. And I would argue personally that Milei has the correct libertarian approach to abortion. If you'd like to go see it, go ahead and through this time code we see intro, inflation, gender ideology, the abortion topic, Pope Francis's affinity for dictators, architecture, advice for Americans and Donald Trump, climate change, China, prayer, and violent political protests. So, as Manuel Garcia Gorgon writes from the Mises Institute, and if you're not familiar with the Mises Institute, please go follow them. They're absolutely incredible. You could not go to a better place to get a solid consolidation of libertarian ideals, policy, stories, books, historical context, so much different stuff. You can go check out the Mises Institute. You can go check out antiwar.com. You can go check out the Libertarian Institute. Let's go ahead and get into this. It says, Milei's full plan, which he laid out in some detail on August 2nd, is nothing if not pragmatic from an anarchist point of view. And we're just going to go ahead and jump through these really quick because I don't want this video to be too long. So, organizational reform of government going from 18 to 8 ministries, significant reduction in public spending, flexibilization of labor regulations. What we see is liberalization of trade, monetary reform, energy reform, fostering environment for growth, agrarian reform, judicial reform, welfare reform, educational reform, health reform, and security reform. The Argentinian election is going to be October 22nd, and this will send shockwaves around the world. If a libertarian anarcho-capitalist gets in to be the president of Argentina, that will be genuinely incredible. And there will be a true voice for liberty who is standing for what is once a beautiful people who stood for the fundamentals of liberty. And I hope that they become a beacon and a shining city on a hill, much like the United States once was. Because when I hear Milei talk about the fact that we're going to bring Argentina back to being an economic powerhouse and we're going to be a world power in 35 years, that's what you sound like when you're a leader driven by purity, passion, and the belief that the people of your country can do great things when simply not inhibited by the regulations and the top-down control of the state. That's all I've got for this. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Hopefully the CIA doesn't get a bit fitsy and see what's going on with the Argentinian election. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it if you got this far. Thumbs up if you liked it. Thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. As per usual, stay lovely, stay great. Peace out.